Diane taught mathematics in Melbourne for 31 years. She was not careless with money. She was not naive about institutions. She had watched the 2008 financial crisis from a distance, noted what happened to people who had trusted banks without reading the fine print, and felt quietly reassured that her situation was different. She had not trusted a bank. She had trusted a government. She had trusted a contract. The contract was specific: 30 years of service, contributions from every paycheck. In return, a defined pension benefit calculated on her final salary, payable for the rest of her life. The state of Victoria made that promise in writing on the day she started teaching in 1991. Her union confirmed it. Her superannuation statements reflected it. What Diane did not know, what almost no one in her position knows, is that the legal architecture underlying that promise is not what it appears to be. The promise exists. The contract exists. The obligation is real. But the mechanism by which it can be modified, reduced, or restructured without technically breaking that promise is also real. It has been tested in courts, it has been confirmed by legislators, and it has been deployed quietly in country after country for longer than most people have been paying attention. In 2022, Diane retired. She filled out the paperwork. She submitted the forms. She calculated her expected monthly payment and built her retirement around it. Every year for 3 decades, a portion of her income had gone into the system. She had held up her end completely. This video examines how pension systems fail, not through sudden collapse, but through a slow structural erosion that is already underway in the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, and across the developed world. The mechanisms are documented. The pattern is consistent. The people most affected are, almost without exception, the ones who followed the rules most carefully. To understand what is happening to pension systems, you need to understand what a pension actually is and what it is not. A pension is a defined benefit retirement plan. When you retire, you receive a fixed amount every month for the rest of your life. That amount is calculated based on your years of service and your final salary. It does not depend on stock market performance. It does not depend on whether the fund's investments performed well or poorly. The benefit is defined. The benefit is guaranteed. That is the promise. On the other side of that promise is a fund. The pension fund collects contributions from employees and employers during the working years. It invests that money. It pays it out during the retirement years. If everything goes according to plan, contributions plus investment returns equal future payouts. Simple arithmetic. The problem is that according to plan requires 3 assumptions to hold simultaneously. First, the fund must receive every contribution it was promised. Second, the investments must return what was projected. Third, the retirees must not live significantly longer than expected. All 3 assumptions have been breaking simultaneously in the same direction for decades. Start with contributions. Every year, actuaries calculate how much money must enter the fund to keep it on track. In theory, governments pay this amount. In practice, they do not fully, not consistently. Illinois, New Jersey, Kentucky, and Connecticut have underfunded their pension contributions for 20, 30, and in some cases 40 consecutive years. Not because the money did not exist, because pension payments are the easiest line item to cut when budgets are tight. The bill does not arrive for decades. The politician who cuts the contribution today faces no consequences in the next election cycle. The politician who will face consequences has not yet been elected. This is not corruption, it is incentive. An incentive, applied consistently across thousands of budget cycles, produces a structural outcome as reliably as gravity produces a falling object. The investment assumption compounds the problem. Pension funds typically assume they will earn 7% annually over the long run. That assumption was calibrated when interest rates were higher and equity returns more robust. Today, reaching 7% requires moving into riskier assets. Private equity, hedge funds, infrastructure, illiquid instruments that carry risks that do not appear on monthly statements. Even with that additional risk, many funds consistently miss their targets. When a fund assumes 7% and earns 5%, that 2% gap compounds over decades into a shortfall that cannot be recovered through contributions alone. And then there is longevity. When most defined benefit pension plans were designed, in the 1950s and 1960s, life expectancy after retirement was 12 to 15 years. Today, it exceeds 20. People collect benefits for longer than the actuarial models anticipated. Every additional year of life expectancy adds a liability the fund was not built to carry. The fund receives less than promised. The money it holds grows more slowly than projected. The money it owes is paid out for longer than anticipated. This is not mismanagement in the conventional sense. It is structural. The design itself contained the mechanism of its own failure. Not immediately, but inevitably, given enough time and consistent political incentive to defer costs. Here, the analysis must become precise, because there is a legal dimension that almost no discussion of pension risk includes. In 1960, the United States Supreme Court decided a case called Fleming versus Nestor, Ephraim Nestor was a Bulgarian immigrant who had worked in the United States for 19 years, paying Social Security taxes throughout. In 1955, he was deported for having been a member of the Communist Party during the 1930s. Congress passed a law terminating Social Security benefits for deported individuals. Nestor challenged this, arguing his contributions had created a contractual right the government could not extinguish. The Supreme Court ruled against him. The court held that participation in Social Security does not create a contractual obligation on the part of the federal government. Congress retains the authority to alter, reduce, or eliminate benefits at any time. It is a statutory benefit, a creation of legislation, subject to modification by legislation. This ruling has never been overturned. It remains settled law. The distinction it establishes is one that most pension participants have never encountered: the difference between a benefit that is enforceable in court and a benefit that can be modified by the same legislative process that created it. The question of which category a given pension falls into depends on the legal architecture of each jurisdiction. In Illinois, the state constitution explicitly protects pension benefits. Courts have struck down reform efforts on those grounds. But in other states, the protection is less absolute, and at the federal level, the Fleming versus Nestor precedent remains fully operative. Diane's pension operates within a different legal framework, but the structural principle applies universally. The promise is only as strong as the institution making it, and institutions, when sufficiently distressed, find legal mechanisms to modify promises that were never intended to be modified. The case studies are not hypothetical. They are documented. Detroit. By 2013, Detroit's two pension funds were underfunded by approximately $3.5 billion. The city had been underfunding contributions for years. Industrial decline had shrunk the tax base. The number of retirees eventually exceeded active workers contributing. When bankruptcy was declared, retirees received a 4.5% cut to monthly benefits, accompanied by the elimination of cost of living adjustments. Over a 20-year retirement, that elimination compounds to a 30 to 40% reduction in real purchasing power. The nominal promise was not technically broken. The real value of the promise was substantially reduced. Pritchard, Alabama. In 2009, Pritchard simply stopped sending pension checks. No bankruptcy filing, no formal negotiation, no court order. The city stated it had no money and ceased payment. Police officers and firefighters who had served the city for decades received nothing. Courts eventually intervened. Years passed. Some retirees died before any resolution was reached. The promise had been absolute. The outcome was not. Puerto Rico. Its pension system had operated essentially as pay-as-you-go. Current contributions sent directly to current retirees with almost no funded reserve. When the economy contracted and emigration accelerated, there were insufficient workers remaining to fund the outgoing checks. Retirees became unsecured creditors in a bankruptcy-like restructuring. The promise had been made by a government. The government ran out of capacity to keep it. Greece, public sector pensions were generous. Retirement ages were low relative to contribution periods. When the European debt crisis arrived in 2010, benefits were cut by up to 40%. Workers who had spent entire careers in public service saw their monthly income collapse within months. The social contract had been explicit. The fiscal reality had been concealed. When concealment became impossible, the adjustment fell on those with the least capacity to absorb it. These are not anomalies. They are the pattern. But the pattern is not universal. Two countries demonstrate that defined benefit systems can be reformed before collapse, if the political will exists early enough. The Netherlands restructured its pension system in the early 2000s, introducing automatic adjustment mechanisms that link benefit levels to fund performance. When returns disappoint or longevity increases, benefits adjust. Modestly, transparently, and without crisis. The system remains solvent. The adjustments are small because they are made continuously rather than catastrophically. Sweden replaced its defined benefit system entirely in 1998 with a notional defined contribution model. Each worker accumulates a personal account balance that reflects actual contributions and actual returns. The government guarantee was reduced. The sustainability was increased. Swedish pension funds rank among the most stable in the developed world. The difference between Detroit and the Netherlands is not resources. It is timing. Reform applied early produces modest adjustment. Reform applied late, or not at all, but produces crisis. The political economy of pension reform makes early correction nearly impossible. Public sector unions are among the most organized forces in state and local government. Any attempt to reduce future benefits faces immediate opposition from workers who have built their financial lives around those benefits. Any attempt to reduce benefits already in payment faces constitutional challenge. Any attempt to increase contributions faces resistance from governments already under fiscal pressure. The result is that reform almost always comes too late. after the funded ratio has fallen to crisis levels, after the fund has run out of options, after the people who were supposed to benefit have structured their lives around a payment that is now uncertain. Consider the ratio of active workers to retirees. In 1960, there were roughly 16 active Social Security contributors for every beneficiary drawing payments. Today, there are approximately 3. In many mature public pension systems, the ratio is worse. Some funds have more retirees drawing benefits than active workers contributing. No investment return assumption can compensate for that arithmetic. And the interest rate environment has closed what many assumed was the final escape route. For 4 decades, falling interest rates inflated asset values across the board. Pension funds benefited from rising bond and equity prices, even when contribution levels were insufficient. That tailwind reversed sharply in 2022. Both bonds and equities fell simultaneously. Pension portfolios suffered. Unlike individual investors who can wait for markets to recover, pension funds must pay benefits every month regardless of portfolio value. Every avenue is narrowing simultaneously. Contributions insufficient, returns uncertain, longevity increasing, demographics deteriorating, legal reform obstructed, political will absent. The trap is complete. When the adjustment comes, and the historical record is unambiguous that it does come, it arrives through one or more of 5 mechanisms. Benefit reductions. Courts or constitutional amendments allow modifications to promised payments. Retirees receive less than contracted. This has happened in Detroit. It happened in Greece. It will happen elsewhere. Tax increases. States and municipalities attempt to close the gap by extracting more from current taxpayers. This works until residents and businesses migrate to lower tax jurisdictions, shrinking the tax base and intensifying the burden on those who remain. Connecticut has experienced this dynamic for over a decade. Service deterioration. Rather than raise taxes or cut benefits, governments simply reduce what they provide. Fewer police officers, longer infrastructure maintenance cycles, understaffed schools. The quality of public services declines invisibly until the decline becomes undeniable. Inflation erosion. This is the subtlest mechanism and, historically, the most frequently deployed. Fixed pension benefits lose purchasing power as prices rise. The nominal payment continues. The real value declines. No vote is required. No court challenge is possible. The beneficiary receives exactly what was promised in numerical terms, and substantially less than was promised in real terms. This is a default that requires no declaration. Federal or national intervention. Central governments absorb state and local pension obligations, socializing the losses across all taxpayers rather than concentrating them on the directly affected population. This rewards jurisdictions that underfunded while penalizing those that maintained fiscal discipline. It also transfers the problem to a balance sheet, the national government ES, that carries its own accumulating obligations. None of these outcomes are painless. None solve the underlying structural problem. They determine only who absorbs the loss. The failure of pension systems is not primarily a failure of character. It is a failure of structure. Specifically, the structure of a system that separates the moment of promise from the moment of reckoning by 20, 30, or 40 years, and places the political incentive to overpromise on one side of that gap while placing all consequences on the other. The postal worker in Weimar Germany received every pfennig he was owed. The payment was technically honored. The purchasing power it represented had been destroyed by a mechanism that required no vote, no legislation, and no formal acknowledgement that anything had changed. The Greek pensioner received formal notification that their benefit had been reduced. The legal process was followed. The promise had been real. The modification was also real. Diane's statements still arrive. The numbers on them still reflect the calculation she was given in 1991. The system is functioning. The paperwork is in order. This is what the pattern looks like in the years before it becomes undeniable. State and local pension funds in the United States are underfunded by somewhere between $1.5 and $5 trillion, depending on the discount rate assumptions applied. The lower figure uses the fund's own optimistic return assumptions. The higher figure uses market-based rates, the methodology required of private sector funds under federal accounting standards. Public funds are not subject to those standards. They set their own assumptions. Illinois pension obligations now consume approximately 27% of the state's general fund budget. That is money not available for schools, roads, or health care. The Illinois Constitution explicitly protects pension benefits. Courts have struck down every reform attempt. The state is legally trapped between a promise it cannot modify and a fiscal reality that makes honoring that promise increasingly incompatible with governing. Kentucky's teachers' retirement system has operated near crisis-funded ratios for years. Chicago's Municipal Employees Fund has hovered in territory where sustained market underperformance makes insolvency a question of arithmetic rather than prediction. These are not warnings about a distant future. They are descriptions of a present condition. The difference between Detroit and the Netherlands was timing. Detroit deferred until deferral was no longer possible. The Netherlands adjusted early, continuously, and without crisis. The difference between those two outcomes is not resources. It is the willingness to read the architecture before the architecture reads you. Diane taught mathematics. She understood compound interest. She understood what happens when the assumptions underlying a calculation prove incorrect over a long time horizon. She did not know about Fleming versus Nestor. She did not know the funded ratio of her pension system. She is not unusual in this. She is the norm. Diane's first pension payment arrived exactly on schedule. The number matched the calculation she had seen on her statements for years. Nothing appeared wrong. That is exactly how these systems look, right before the adjustment begins. Leave a comment with this question. Knowing what the Fleming versus Nestor ruling established, knowing that the legal architecture of pension promises is not what most participants believe it to be, does it change anything about how you're thinking about your own retirement? I read every comment. The answers shape what this channel examines next. The statement will keep arriving. The number will keep looking correct. Until it doesn't. And the distance between those two moments, the moment when everything appears normal, and the moment when the change becomes undeniable, is exactly the window in which understanding the architecture still allows for a response. That window is the reason this channel exists.